Here we are in 2024. We got Oklahoma coming into the SEC, and apparently no one wants to talk about it because we've also got Texas coming into the SEC. And judging by my mentions, everyone wants to talk about it. And I got a question for you. Do you think it's possible for everyone to be in for a rude awakening in this whole equation? I've got one crowd over here shouting that Texas is about to suffer baptism by fire. They don't know what they're walking into. And I got a crowd over here, and they're shouting, you haven't seen anything like Texas is about to bring. The entire concept of SEC superiority is a myth, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. We're gonna basically break down the wall, and a lot of you are going to get your feelings hurt seeing what we do year one in your conference in the process. Could be that neither of you are right. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Colin, you got that tweet that I was scrolling through the internet. Dangerous thing to do on Sunday afternoon. And this thing's been going for months and months and months. Really, it's been going ever since we knew Texas was coming to the SEC. But now that we're not years away, and I've looked at my imaginary watch twice in the show already, now that we're just a few months away, boy, it's really getting turned up. So apparently, Mike Griffith the other day talked about Sark and his high-powered offense, but the week-to-week physicality in the SEC will bring the Longhorns and keep them under the win total. Okay, so then our good buddy Kyle out there in Longhorn country says there is nothing special about an SEC schedule. In their first season, Texas is going to disprove all the theories that people have, like the Aggies and SEC Mike have been trying to popularize for the last decade plus, about the physicality and prowess that can only be found in the SEC. Well, the lie detector determined that this is a lie. There is a level of physicality that can only be found in the SEC. There is a level of competitive balance that can only be found in the SEC. And when I say balance, I don't mean the bottom team can beat the top team. Vanderbilt's not walking into Tuscaloosa or Athens and winning on any given Saturday. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how deep the conference is. I've had these conversations. I've had these arguments before. So sometimes I do this on the show. I'm gonna take it upon myself to fill in the blank. I'm going to make the point here, and then I know what the counterpoint is. So I tell you that the SEC is much deeper than any other conference out there, including the one Texas is coming from, that being the Big 12. And so if you're calling into question that you're walking into a much deeper conference and that strength of league schedule year into year out is a whole different animal in the SEC than it was in the Big 12, you're wrong. It is a different animal. There is a level of play in the SEC collectively that is not found anywhere else in college football. Take that exactly for what it means. There is a level of play top to bottom that's found in the SEC that's not found anywhere else top to bottom in college football. So that doesn't mean the national champ can't come from somewhere else. They just did. Michigan just won it 5 minutes ago and went through an SEC team in the process. So it doesn't mean anything other than what it means. But what I did want to illustrate in explaining the different world that Texas is walking into is there will be weeks where, like, Texas will go on the road. They'll randomly play Kentucky. They'll probably beat Kentucky. And you won't see the training room the next day. And you won't understand that Texas, in the process of getting that win, just found out what the point is that people like me are making about the SEC. I go watch Georgia play Mississippi State or something like that. And Georgia wins. It could be a runaway, could be a little clunky, more hard-fought contest than you expected. But what I always found fascinating was I'm all over the country, so I'm watching these games every week. And I used to just watch these big boys in the SEC play middle-of-the-road teams record-wise. And you'd see the collisions, and you'd see the physicality. You'd see the point of attack, line of scrimmage play, and you'd say, I cannot believe this team over here is en route to going 4-7 or 4-8 this year. And the reason is because not all the teams are good, but there are some bad teams in the SEC that have a lot of guys that are about to go on to play Sunday ball. That isn't found nearly to that degree elsewhere. So I want you to think about this for a second. Texas is coming from the Big 12, right? And the Big 12 over the past 4 seasons has had 108 players drafted. So has the SEC. If I take out Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, and Kentucky to explain the level of depth that you have in the SEC compared to where you just came from, I could take the top 5 NFL talent producing teams out of the conference, and they still match down to the number. They still match the conference you just came from. And the reason I illustrate it like that is because a lot of folks want to look at the SEC and say, well, they're just as top heavy as anyone else. You take away Bama, Georgia, and what? Take away Bama, Georgia, and what? I just told you I'd take the top 5 of them out of the SEC. And it's still as deep a talent-producing conference as the one you just came from. I'm not hating on the Big 12. I love the Big 12. I openly call the Big 12 America's College Football Conference. But you got to understand, the reason I call them that is not because they're matching the SEC man for man. It's for many other reasons. Having said that, the SEC is also in for a little rude awakening of their own. Not everyone in the SEC. Georgia will be fine regardless of what Texas does here. Alabama will probably be fine regardless of what Texas does here. However, I have noticed that there are certain corners of the SEC where people are chanting just that. They're chanting SEC towards Austin. And really, all you guys should be chanting is L, because you're going to take one more per year because a team like Texas just entered the pool. It's not enough food for everyone. And Texas is going to eat long before most of you are. Texas is really good. They are really loaded. And so I would just like to remind you that, you know, a bunch of you are looking around right now and you're used to hiding under the cape of a few programs and you're used to being able to beat your chest down in the SEC because they carry all the water. And since you've got the same sticker on your helmet conference-wise that they do, it makes you feel some sort of inclusion. And I guess I have no problem with that. It always seemed kind of peculiar if I were in Fayetteville and they were chanting because of something Alabama did. Not to bemoan my good friends in Northwest Arkansas, but understand what's coming into this conference. Texas is right on par with the best in the conference. Texas right now, last 3 years, has averaged a class in recruiting ranked 4.5. Bama, Georgia. That's the end of the list of other teams you have in the SEC that can match or exceed that. So you don't go too far down the list. They don't get on the bus and walk too far down the aisle before there's a seat for them. The seat for Texas in the SEC is right near the front of the bus. But they were always loaded, Josh. Texas is one of the most tired talking points in all of college football. Well, Texas has always been ultra-talented. They've always been loaded. They've always recruited like this. No, they haven't. No, they haven't. And I'm gonna let Steve Sarkisian talk to you for a second because we were out there last month and I got him to talk about this. But then I want to take a sledgehammer outside of this sod and I want to hammer it home. Roll it, Colin.
Describe how different the depth is here compared to what you inherited.
Well, just that was year 1, year 2. We couldn't play a spring game. And the reason was I would have 7, maybe 8 offensive linemen total that could physically go compete in a game. This year in spring practice, we had 17 to 19 to 20. I mean, when you start adding up the walk-ons and so on and so forth. So now you can play a real game. And that goes across the board, whether it's having enough receivers, having enough defensive linemen. Now, I think a couple things have contributed to that. One, I think we've structured our roster in a way to where we have equality in depth across the board. It's not just 1 or 2 position groups that are loaded. We've kind of assembled it in a way that is lateral.
Lateral assemblance of talent. Stacking across the board. You hear what he said there. Texas didn't always do that. Texas, it's true, always had pretty good recruiting rankings long before Sark got there, long before they were doing anything of note in the post-Mac Brown era. They weren't recruiting whole football teams. They had, if you made recruiting like a heat map, they'd be really hot over here in like the wide receiver room. They'd be ice cold on the lines of scrimmage. To the point where, like he just said, when he got there, they couldn't even do a spring game. They didn't have enough big bodies. At Texas, they didn't have enough big bodies. So that was then, this is now. Texas is the envy of most of America, including most of the SEC, on the lines of scrimmage, which is ironic because one of the biggest question marks about them is losing big talent on the interior of their defensive line. But unlike years past, this is not a poverty roster where it counts the most. They have recruited, as Sark said, very laterally and very effectively. Transfer portal, they've been able to go out and do whatever they need to do. Recruiting, they've been able to go do whatever they need to do. As a result, they enter the SEC as the second odds-on favorite to win the conference in year 1. We got Utah coming to the Big 12 favored to win it in year one. Texas right behind Georgia as the second odds-on favorite at FanDuel to win the SEC in year one. I have an acronym that I believe applies here. MAD with 2 Ds, mutually assured destruction debate, which is what a lot of you are having. If you think the SEC is about to swallow Texas whole, you're insane. If you think Texas is about to run roughshod through the SEC like a hot knife through butter, you're also insane. Both of you are going to end up taking L's. Now, there is one thing to consider, and that is that there is no Alabama, there's no LSU, there's no Tennessee, there's no Ole Miss, and there's no Missouri on Texas's schedule this year. They do go to A&M at the end of the year. They do get Georgia in there. Inexplicably, somewhere in Austin, the same weekend that they are running an F1 race. So, community organization, not at the forefront of the SEC schedule release in the state of Texas. But here's what's really funny to me. All right, so as Texas goes through this season, they'll be what they'll be. If Texas does go through this inaugural season in the SEC and come mid-November, they're in the thick of the SEC championship race, and then they end up going to Atlanta, maybe they win the SEC, I'm going to have, I guarantee you, some of the same people telling me about SEC depth about to take Texas out at the knees that will yell, well, they didn't play anybody. Excuse me? Are you suggesting that there are 1 or 2 big dogs in the SEC, and if you dodge them, it's like Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten, you're home free? You just shouted for the entirety of the summer about the depth of the conference. So all I'm trying to do, as I usually do this time of year, is make sure we're all on record here. Is it the depth that's going to swallow Texas, or is it a top-heavy conference and they avoid the big boys, and even if they didn't avoid the big boys, they'd be able to go blow for blow with them? Hey, I think Texas is really good and really on par with the best of the best in this conference. The best of the best in this conference sometimes don't win the conference because of the conference. That's all I'm saying. I think this is probably the last year we ever have this argument because henceforth, Texas and OU, remember, Oklahoma's coming too. Remember that from this point forward, they'll be in the conference and no one will argue from outside the fence about a newcomer. Now, what I can't control is whether in the future Texas and Oklahoma are sitting in their seats and having been here for a couple of years looking outside at whomstever the next additions to the SEC end up being. No, surely we're done with conference realignment, right? Right? Got no answer.